Other 70s/80s kids. What is the weirdest thing you remember being a normal thing that would probably result in a child services case now? My dad used WD-40 on the leather back seats of our car so us kids could slide better around turns. He also removed the seat belts because he didn't like them. I spent half of my childhood at the bar my mom worked at, and not even always in the back room. And I was serving drinks and other alcoholic beverage when I was 6 or so. With all the manners I thought a good waitress had. People found it cute and tipped very well. Example. I used to walk by myself to the corner store 3 blocks from home as a 5-year-old and buy smokes for my parents with a note. My parents used to turn us loose on the countryside and we wouldn't come home until it was dinner time. I don't know if I could do the same with my kids now. They are much younger than I was, but I would have to reevaluate when they are a similar age. I had a lot of close calls. One time I hurt my ankle in a rusty car graveyard that I found miles from civilization. One time a homeless man was sleeping out in the woods and offered me a drink from his thermos. One time I fell in a hole that was like 10 feet deep. We had to stay outside all day if we wanted something to drink. We had the water hose. Being sent outside to pick out my own stick for a spanking from the backyard and having the neighbor lady see me crying and lean over the fence to say, "What did ya do now, hon? You gotta learn to behave." The back window of the car was the choice seat. Teachers being able to publicly ridicule you in front of the class. Live in Iowa and it was never too cold to delay or cancel school and we still had outside recess on those days. We would get yelled at for huddling in a corner out of the wind. Go run around. That will warm you up. That and the total rural kid thing of riding in the back end of pickups at highway speeds. In the summertime mom would kick us outside. We would wander the neighborhood with our friends, eat at various houses, and wander home at dark. This was normal. Mode of transportation was a bike. No cell phones. No computers. In the 80s arcades made a comeback and we could be found there. Honestly, the 70s was a great time to be a kid. Taking candy from strangers. My mother's motto was ain't nobody got time to stick pins and needles inside a Twizzler, so get it while the getting's good. Playgrounds were all hot steel and concrete with really high fall hazards. It wasn't a playground. It was a proving ground to cull out the weak. For as long as I could remember, my deceased grandfather used to offer me sips of his Budweiser. My parents didn't blink an eye. Being allowed to play outside until after dark unsupervised until mom or dad called me in with the police whistle. Unstructured playtime. Giving zero fricks about which activities look best on college applications 10 years later. Laying stomach down on the lower level of the grocery cart while my mom did her shopping. Or was I the only one who did that? Being sent to the headmaster's office and knowing you were about to be screamed at and possibly smacked. For really bad infractions it was the slipper. It was unthinkable that you would tell your parents because you'd get the same punishment. He'd be arrested and put through a very public trial nowadays. It was banned around 1988, but continued on until well into the 1990s. I was slippered for missing too much homework around 1991. Never missed any again. My secondary school handbook stated, it's illegal for us to hit children now, but parents should be aware sometimes hands may slip. Please contact the school if you are not comfortable with this. Reading all of these responses really brings back memories of great times as a kid growing up in the 70s. The only thing I didn't see mentioned was candy cigarettes. I remember going to the corner store with my dad and getting a pack of candy cigarettes when he got his pack of smokes. And I've never smoked. Ah, the good old days. No car seats, point road in the back of the truck where it was open. Went to store by myself aged 5 with the money. Was working at age 11. Went out all day with no supervision. Playing with toy guns that looked like real guns. Being a child sitting on someone's lap driving a car. When I was about 8 my mom would drop my friend and I off at the Indianapolis Children's Museum when it opened and then would come back and get us when it closed. We each had $20 to buy food or whatever. It was so awesome. We would pretend different exhibits were our houses or jobs. There is no way I would let S-kid go someplace alone at that age. My first job was babysitting a 6-year-old. I was only 10. At 5 years old in 1978, I walked 6 blocks to kindergarten every day by myself. No helmets. One time I fell asleep on the back of my dad's motorcycle after a day at the beach. Shorts and flip-flops. His right hand was on the throttle, left hand kept me from sliding off. I used to ride my bike all over town with no parental guidance. There was always a group of us, and we'd stay out until the sun was going down. I'm sure that'd bring up some kind of neglect claims now. Also, I can remember riding in the front seat of my parents/grandparents' cars while sitting on my knees so I could see over the dashboard. I did have a seat belt on, but there were no booster seats for me to ride in. From elementary school in the late 70s/early 80s time frame, the school's principal would, with parental permission, spank unruly students. He used a ping pong paddle, fairly lightly, and always performed the discipline in front of witnesses, other office personnel, usually 2 of the secretaries. Nowadays, holy hell would you be in the middle of a crap storm if you even suggested this. Corporal punishment. The school had a big wooden paddle with holes drilled into it, and kids had to write their initials on it after being beaten. Also at home. But it was usually just a wooden spoon. Riding in the back of our truck. Headmaster using the cane on poorly behaved primary school, 12 and under, boys, all boys private school in Sydney. Abundant access to firecrackers, BBQ gun, and kerosene. What doesn't kill you kids, makes you stronger and wiser. Up here again with another of my own traumatic childhood experiences. Hope it wasn't normal even for 1988. My dad took my brother and I, 4 and 5 at the time, to the Legion, bar designed for veterans. Not sure if they have similar in the States, because it's open and always had some available slot machines during the day. Well, we played outside for hours, and then my dad picked a fight, or got cut off for whatever reason, and got kicked out. He ended up passing out in a ditch walking the back way to the road. I couldn't wake him up, and I ran to the corner store, where I used to buy mom smokes, and the lady gave me a quarter for the payphone, and I called my next door neighbor crying that my dad was dying, and I can't lift him up. I feel that crap probably fricked me up a lot more than I realize. My partner lived in Brooklyn. His mom and her friends would kick all of the kids out of the apartments during the summer, with the warning they'd get spanked if they came back before the street lights came on, and that they'd get spanked if they didn't haul us back home as soon as the street lights came on. For us it was what would now be chalked up to medical neglect. We never went to well child checks. My mom got us vaccinations and weighed us at the health department. You saw a doctor if you couldn't keep the fever down for a week, or if something alarming, like a seizure, happened. Dad would sit us on his lap and let us steer the Chevelle. One of my earliest memories was hanging out at a junkyard while Dad got some parts, and he no idea how, but the car was going. Dad ran alongside, jumped in and hit the brakes in time before a drop off. Don't tell your mother was used a lot. I also would ride my bike all over in the street, only I was too short for my bike and would sometimes slip off the seat, and then no brakes. Once, I essentially ran into the side of a parked car, luckily ours, to stop. No helmet, pads or any of that jazz. Just walk it off, you're fine. And I was buying cigarettes for mom at likely age 8. Winston soft pack will always be embedded in my memory. My mom walked me to school maybe the first few days of kindergarten, and then with few exceptions after that, I walked/biked either alone or with friends the same age every day from K-12. This is roughly 1979, 1992. It was perfectly normal, and honestly, I think it's more weird that we've come to a point where kids can't be left unattended until they're teenagers. The crime stats don't suggest the world is any more dangerous than it was in the 80s. We just have more 24-hour news channels with their time to fill. And with 2-income or single-parent families being the norm now, it's a huge freaking burden for either the school districts or the working parents to shuttle these kids back and forth for so many years. When I was around 10 years old, for a couple summers my mother would get rid of me by putting me on a Greyhound bus from Edmonton to Winnipeg, which took about 1 day of travel. I would get off the bus by myself and wander around places like Saskatoon when we had stops. Then eventually I would get dumped off and picked up by grandma, where I would spend my summer on a farm doing chores. Grandma would also send me to Bible camp, while as soon as I was gone my mom would fly to fun places like California. I wouldn't hear from her till I was sent back on the bus and she picked me up. Born in '85. My parents were pretty into motorcycles and would take my younger sister and me on rides well before we even entered elementary school. With only a helmet as protective gear, we had to cling on to them ourselves. I'd usually ride with my father, my sister with our mother. Just imagine a 5-year-old and a 4-year-old on the back of a Honda or Suzuki today. It was glorious and insane. Parents used to soak a napkin or whatever in Jack Daniel's whiskey and apply it for toothaches. Dad would leave me alone in the house to pick up my wasted mom. I was 7 and would be home for at least an hour by myself. I do not ever remember being in a car seat. Any car trip more than 30 minutes I would lay down in the back seat and sleep. Never had a curfew, so I could stay out past dark. None of the other kids could. Used to use cardboard boxes to slide down the steep hill in the neighborhood. Grandparents let me play in the basement, which had a full bar. I used to pour whiskey for my stuffed animals to drink. Getting kicked out of the house in the morning during the summer and told not to come home till it was dark. Bonus, drink from the hose if you're thirsty was a common phrase. I used to sleep on the ledge in the back window of the car. I liked feeling the speakers vibrate on my ear while the sun warmed my whole body. Best nap ever. One time my brother and I didn't want to put our seatbelts on. My mum was tired of fighting with us, so she brake checked us. We went flying into the backs of the front seats. We never thought about putting them on again. Walking to school with all the kids in the neighborhood. Like no one got a ride to school, even in the middle of winter. Never was there a mass of cars in front of the elementary school picking up kids or teachers directing traffic. In 1989, when I was 8 years old, my family lived in the Valley Cliff area of Squamish, BC. I was allowed to ride my bike to Alice Lake by myself. If I wanted to go swimming, the rule was I had to make a friend and swim with them. If their parents asked where my parents were, I was to tell them at the picnic area or something. Being punished by the neighbor for crap we did, then having them call your parents and getting punished again. But I would go through it all again because it meant neighbors were family. Today no one even knows the neighbors. I was about 6 when my mom left me in the car while she went in a store to look at wallpaper. She had me hold my foot on the gas pedal because it was such a crap box. It would stall and die if you didn't hold it down. She was really specific. Don't push it down any further and do not let up on the pedal or else. I was terrified. It was unbearably hot. The car was a convertible and the roof was open, so at least I didn't die. My foot was shaking. I honestly thought the car was going to take off any minute. I had no concept that it was in park. It seemed like hours before she came back. I was crying and sweating and traumatized. Every time I go by that store I have flashbacks. I'm 54 now. I'm not sure what it says about me that I didn't let the car stall, but she was mad at me anyway for being ridiculous and crying about nothing. I'm sure it wasn't abusive, but I don't think parents would make a kid do that now. Latchkey kids as young as kindergarten would wear a house key on a string around their neck so they could let themselves in when they got home and remained alone and unsupervised until the parent or parents got home from work. Usually made own dinner in the microwave, cause the folks were too tired to cook. Sorry, another one. Putting chalk in the folds of the board erasers so the teacher would draw lines when she tried to erase the board. And yes, I went to school in the 1800s. Running in to pay my mom's bills and filling out checks when I was 7, 8. When I was in kindergarten my family lived in a village. One evening my parents tucked me in and left the house to go to the cinema a couple blocks away. I was alone with my stuffed bear and a heater near me. I think it was more common back then to leave kids unsupervised. Well, that night my bear fell onto the heater and caught fire. My parents came home on time and nothing terrible happened, but in hindsight a babysitter or not leaving a heater by your kindergartner's bed would have been smart. I'm too lazy to read, and it's probably in here 20 times. But I'd have to say parties and BBQs where everybody has a cig to the point of there being a stratum of haze in the air and there are shirtless kids and toddlers on the laps of wasted adults being given sips of drinks so everybody can laugh at their reaction, whether they enjoy it or are revolted, and Creedence Clearwater Revival and the Grateful Dead are blasting in the background, while the wastedest adult is surrounded by kids lighting off colorful explosives. And I wouldn't trade the memories for anything. Being happily alone outside and unsupervised for entire days, and being trusted to come back on my own if I got hungry, tired, or hurt without having to check in, or even owning a cell phone. There's an entire level of autonomy and self-reliance that children just no longer have or understand anymore. It's freaking sad. I used to ride in my dad's Oldsmobile Delta 88 laying across the backseat dash on long trips. Chickenpox parties. Riding around town on my Buick with no supervision, no phone, fully trusted that I would return home when the street lights turned on. Bike helmet? What's a bike helmet? Also, just the freedom we had. I posted somewhere else yesterday that my friend and I used to walk around the corner by ourselves to buy pizza. We could not have been more than 4 years old. Today, I understand that some of my friends don't even let their kids play outside alone. Being put in a small barred playpen all day as a toddler, while parents got on with stuff. Smoking everywhere, malls and restaurants, but the worst was at home in the car, just allowing it to linger in the air. Heaven forbid they turn on a fan or crack a window. So glad that this has actually changed. My grandma did the old whiskey, lemon and honey cough syrup thing. Crap was good. I wasn't born in the 70s. But my coworker who has told me back then in school he and a lot of his friends used to carry guns to class. It wasn't a big deal. And there were no school shootings at the time. It's kinda funny reading through this thread. As someone growing up in Eastern Europe in the 90s, pretty much everything here is what I experienced as a kid. Walking home from school 2-3 miles every day across the city as young as 5. Being outside unsupervised from dusk till dawn. Trying alcohol when I was like 7-8 without it being a big deal. Being left home alone for long periods of time when I was as young as 8 or 9. Corporal punishment being doled out like candy. At times if you were bad even the neighbor would join in and crack you across the head. It was a bit of a cultural shock moving from that to Canada. It was a long gone practice by time I reached high school. But when I was a kid, the high school kids that went deer hunting would keep their rifles in their lockers so they could head straight out after school. Riding in the back of pickup trucks. My mother liked to go fishing. She would pack us 3 kids, 6, 4, 1, up in the car early in the morning. She'd drive to the river, park under a shade tree, and roll down all the windows. She'd take off down the river to fish. We stayed in the car. We had a jug of water and 1 sandwich each for lunch. If you ate your sandwich too early, too bad. The 2 older kids were responsible for keeping the baby quiet and changing diapers. I can remember waving out the car windows to other fishermen. No one seemed bothered by it. Who rode in the station wagons that had the back seat turned backwards, no seat belts and about 2 inches of steel between you and the car behind you? Belt, wooden spoon, slipper or open hand. Take a pick. My dad bought me a go-kart. I drove it on the street to faraway places. 10 years old. No helmet. No seatbelt. 6 inches off the asphalt. 50 miles per hour. No supervision for 10-hour chunks of time. Got my own gas at the gas station, where the guys knew me. They just put it on my dad's account. Starting when I was 6 years old. In 1978, my dad instituted the 2 drinks a year policy. I'd get a can of drink on Nye and another one on the 4th of July. I can't imagine that would fly in many households these days. We used to pile into our neighbor's station wagon, so the neighbor could drive us to the dump, where we watched the black bears dig through the garbage from what was probably not an objectively safe distance. Me, cousins, friends, at least 6 of us. Nice try, BuzzFeed. Having a babysitter who was like a year or 2 older than you. Wife was 11 babysitting a 9, 5 and 2 year old. Born in 1981. My parents would take me to parties with their friends. I would sleep in the car if I was too tired. The least wasted of the two would drive home, and yeah, no seat belts. Good times. Odd to think that the people lamenting the lack of these freedoms are also the people who took them away. Run around buck naked playing in the kiddie pool in the front yard. Fighting over the rear-facing bench seat in the back of a friend's Mercury station wagon. Wood paneling. Match. So we could bounce around and play fight. Of course there were no seat belts there. Definitely more 70s. My mom would blow cigarette smoke in my ear to help relieve the pain of an earache. It worked. Getting our mouths washed out with soap when we got caught swearing. My wife's version was having Tabasco sauce put under her tongue.